wanted to say thank you to everybody that's joining us for the session today, and a big thank you to Tech, who's invited us to come and hopefully give you guys a little bit of insight into our learnings over the past 11 years, being involved in creating very innovative learning environments and ultimately seeing the effect that these have on learners, both now and well into the future. Just a little bit of a brief introduction about NorvaNivel. Our company started 11 years ago in Australia, and when we began this journey into education, we fell into it really in an unusual kind of way. What we learned 11 years ago, entering into our very first school, was about significant changes that were starting to emerge and happen within the educational landscape. It was this long ago that we realized that if we didn't change the way in which we educate our kids moving forward, very, very quickly, they were going to fall behind and not be able to really facilitate these future-ready skills that were going to help them thrive, and more than survive, but absolutely thrive in the world in which we know that we are in today. What we've learned about was these real demand for these skills known as transversal skills. Sometimes they're also referred to as soft skills, but this really in-depth understanding that it's the human skills that are going to be absolutely necessary when training our kids, as opposed to just teaching them content and knowledge that they had to learn and regurgitate. There was massive drivers that were starting to happen and shift the way that we were starting to see education. It wasn't so much the fact that, education itself was seeming to change, but it was the demands that was coming from around us that was really propelling this discussion and this need to be able to make sure that we were giving kids the right foundations. So when they left school in 10, 15, 20 years' time, they were able to enter the workforce skilled up in a way that were going to allow them to be the most successful. 11 years ago, these were, the things that were really, really coming to the forefront then. Technology was a huge driver in how it was changing the way that we live, learn, and interact with each other. It was really starting to be introduced into schools through technology such as the smart technology. And it was showing us that there were different ways of engaging with content and engaging with each other in order to foster the development of such skills. At the time, there were some really real statistics that were getting thrown around, and these, a decade later, are still equally relevant, if not even more so, after everything that we've experienced over the last year specifically. So what we know is this: 65% of future jobs have not yet been created. So training kids to be, profession specific is probably not going to really help facilitate them in the future, given that we don't know what it looks like in terms of the job market at all. We also know now that 50% of our current workforce lacks the needed skills necessary in order for them to thrive in the future. So what this means right now is that even people who are currently in the workforce need to be retrained in order to display those relevant skills that are not going to help them be successful, but help them help the companies they work for be successful contributors to society also. It was really, really intriguing to us when we started this journey, and this was something that we learned ourselves along the way, that it wasn't just the content that kids were learning inside the classroom that was really a key contributor in them honing these skills. It was the learning space itself that was a significant contributor to the growth and development of these transversal skills. Some of the skills that are really critical that we speak about, things like critical thinking, problem solving, communication, creativity, all of these skills that if honed in for the learner and them given the opportunity to practice again and again and again, will ultimately allow learners to then move out of school into the work environment and be masters at these skills. If you have a look at any sort of job interview that a child that a person goes to these days, these are the types of things that employers seek to understand about the people that they're bringing into their organizations. They want to make sure that they have mastered the skills of collaboration or are open to them, as well as communication and critical thinking, being able to problem solve in a world that is constantly changing, and being adaptable to be able to move with those changes is critical, especially post-pandemic world as we're sitting in right now. The learning space itself, as we've seen through research over the years, not only provides opportunities for these interactions to happen, but very, very specifically can help students and learners master these skills. So what we've recognized is, and this is the key to creating an environment that is impactful enough that it's going to facilitate the growth of these skills within these learners, that a space designed for the average learner is a space designed for no one. There is a really wonderful TED talk that I encourage everybody to go and listen to. It is by a gentleman called Todd Rose. If anybody's not familiar with them, please go and check him out on YouTube. Todd Rose talks about learners having a jagged learning profile, and really hones in on the fact that if we are creating learning environments for the average learner, we're ultimately creating learning environments that are not suitable for anybody. We've got to look at every single child that exists within that space, and we've got to make sure that we are facilitating the needs of all of those children in order to create a very harmonious environment where every single child gets what they need. This is not easily achieved when you create a learning environment that has 28 desks and chairs, the same, looking forward. What we've discovered is when we put in a variety of furniture and we think about space in a different kind of way, and we think about all the different needs of learners from every part of the spectrum, and we can design spaces that facilitate those needs, what we create is an environment that is absolutely conducive to a very engaging learning opportunity for everybody. So how can learning spaces foster the skills that learners need to really succeed in a future that we've yet to determine? And this is always the most challenging thing. The world is changing at such a fast pace. How do we know what we're doing today is going to serve our learners well into the future? And how can we ensure that our learning spaces work as hard as our educators do to not only facilitate and support the learner, but at the same time, facilitate and support the type of learning and be relevant to the type of learning that's happening in education right now? I think we've all recognized that there is a desperate need to change the way that we teach our kids, the way that they consume information and then utilize that information is very different to what happened 20 or 30 years ago. This means that we have to change, just like every single other industry or part of this world. We have got to make sure that we are providing relevant spaces and relevant content for our learners to be able to be successful. And very, very specifically, we do it by very intentional, intuitive design. This slide hopefully gives you guys a really good visual of where we're coming from and where we actually need to go to when we're talking about creating really future-focused, learner-centered spaces. And this involves us moving away from that cells and bells approach to a learner-centered environment. Over many years, people have asked why. Why do we need to? What is the difference between learning in a desk and a chair in a row, as opposed to learning in an environment that's agile and truly reflective of meeting, those soft needs that kids have? Very specifically, understanding how learners move from school into the workforce. We're no longer training kids to go and work in factories and be linear thinkers. What we're actually doing is we're training kids to be able to think very, very differently, very creatively, and be significant contributors to society in ways that we have never thought before. What we're trying to do is ensure that we're not limiting kids to what we know, but rather we're providing very open-ended opportunities for them to be able to learn and grow as humans, to be able to make mistakes and grow from them and understand what's right and wrong, where they learn best and how they perform best and collaborate and connect best with the people around them. Understanding that we're not producing factory workers anymore, what we really need to understand is the sooner that we allow kids to operate in environments that are going to be more reflective of the way that they are going to work in the future, the better equipped they're going to be once they leave school. This side by side hopefully gives you a really great understanding of the difference between these two models and why the cells and bells model approach may have been relevant 50 years ago, but no longer is going to serve us today. And that brings us to a very real obligation. Both NorvaNivel as a company, myself as a mother of 4 children, you guys as educators, working so hard to make sure that you're equipping the next generation to go out and be successful and be phenomenal contributors to this world. We all have a joint obligation to do that together collectively. So over the next few slides, I'm going to hopefully be able to share some stories with you guys, give you some ideas on how we approach this and exactly what it means to be able to create learning environments that are going to capture all of these needs. I hope at the end of it, we give you guys ideas and tools that are going to help you think differently around learning environment and really understand the critical and significant importance of thinking about space when you're thinking about designing education in general. The first thing is designing solutions that solve problems in education. And these problems vary from problems around ensuring that we create relevant learning environments that facilitate and match the type of teaching that's going on within those spaces. For example, a STEM space or a STEAM space has very different pedagogical requirements as a 3rd grade classroom might. So every single space that's designed really needs to be thought of intentionally on the type of learning that's going on inside those spaces. More importantly than even that, or as importantly as that, it's understanding the different types of learners that are operating inside that space and ensuring that those learners have everything they need to be successful. It is our ambition one day that kids who have got special needs do not need to get pulled out of the normal learning environment in order for those needs to be met, but that rather than that, we can actually facilitate every learner's needs inside the environment so that kids across the spectrum are learning how to work, learn, and engage together all the time. We design products and spaces with the intent of learners as individuals. People often ask to us when they look at environments like the one that you see on the screen. And this school is actually, it's Eden Park, which is in Rhode Island. People ask us all the time, how do kids mess about in environments like this? Do they misbehave? What we have seen over the last decade is an incredible change in how kids respond to learning and the people around them once you actually intentionally meet the needs of each individual child, particularly kids that have struggled to sit straight in a normal classroom setting. If you give them the opportunity to be able to be comfortable and to see color and to be able to interact with the furniture the way that they see fit for that particular task, you're going to get a far more engaged and focused learner. One of the things that's important to us is it's okay for kids to make mistakes inside these spaces, and we celebrate that. And it's quite unbelievable the transformation to learners when you actually give them an environment that suits their needs. The respect that they have for the space that they work in is completely different to if you give them an environment that is linear and is not really hitting them on a social and emotional level. We must give learners a space to discover their own path to agency. As educators, we all understand the importance of this term agency. It's really critical that we again give them the skills to be functioning humans, to make good decisions, to make bad decisions. The learning environment and the way that it's set up really helps facilitate those decision-making skills. Giving kids building blocks where they themselves can set up a space around them and to meet the needs of the task as well as how they're feeling at that point in time is a very, very powerful message to a child. And it's really going to make them feel not only better about themselves, but feel more comfortable to take the risks that we hope that they're going to take in these very, very safe environments. We speak a lot in education about equality and the difference between equality and equity. A company like ours really focuses on this idea of equity and this understanding that, it's not about giving every single learner the same thing, but it's ensuring that we give every single learner the tools that they need to be successful. And what this means inside a learning environment is that it's a very varied approach to how we create these spaces or curate these spaces. We must collaborate on behalf of children and the educators that serve them in order to be really successful about how we approach this. It should be a collaboration between people like us who design and create spaces and products for learners, technology companies like tech that are at the forefront of creating environments that speak to the future with regards to technology. Learners giving us their perspective on how they learn best. And of course, educators who are at the center of this with the learner, really understanding how we can facilitate the teaching and the learning process to ensure that every single person inside that space is really getting that maximum level of engagement because their needs are being met. So what are some of these key considerations for designing any learning space? The first thing and the most important thing, and I've touched on it previously earlier, is equitable spaces. Spaces that are there for individuality and accessibility. It's a real mental shift for us, starting out thinking that the best way to approach learning and learning environments was that every child was going to get the same thing, to really thinking about what does it mean when every child gets what they need. And when you look at it through that lens from a design perspective as pertains to a learning space, what you end up with is an environment that has got very, very unique elements to it, that thinks about the whole child, their emotional, social development, and then aligns that with how we consider design. Collaborative spaces that encourage community and culture. Now more than ever, we've recognized through this pandemic how important that human connection is, to create those spaces that facilitate these interactions, and there are millions of these interactions, and really help support people to be connected in with each other as well as connected in with the content. Any school is the absolute pinnacle hub of a community. And it's within that environment that not only learners collaborate with each other, but collaborate with educators. Parents come in and collaborate with the school, with educators, and the greater community. If we can create learning environments that really speak to the sense of community and reflect the culture that exists within that school, then people are far more connected into what's happening within that environment. Agile spaces that can intuitively respond to unknown change. There is a lot of talk, as you guys probably have heard, around the buzzwords around education and about learning spaces. A lot of the time we talk about flexible learning environments. We like to take it a little bit of a step further. When we think about a flexible space or a flex space, that means the space can be reconfigured again and again to known configurations. And that's great. But because we were working and living in such an uncertain time, we need to try and create learning environments that are agile, which means that they can intuitively respond and change to unknown ways. What we're trying to do is to create learning environments that are future relevant. A challenge given how quickly the future is changing, but when you create spaces and products that speak to the needs of people, and then you put them in such a way that's going to meet the needs of the pedagogy, and be able to really move with that, then you're going to create these truly agile, future-focused learning environments. Safe and connected spaces to consider learner social and emotional growth. This is where I love to tell a story of this little boy that you see in this picture. This was actually taken about a year ago at a school that we did in Indiana, called Walnut Grove Elementary, and it actually is the most phenomenal school. This particular school has gone through a 2-year process thinking about the way that they curate and create their learning spaces in order to really facilitate their learners moving forward. The principal of the school, Brian Proctor, shared this picture with us of this little boy. So what you see are some NorvaNivel pieces of furniture, predominantly soft seating. The principal shared with us that the little boy in this picture is highly autistic. He's been going to the school for many years, and his interaction with both the kids and the educators in the school has been very, very minimal. They've not been able to reach him on an emotional level at all. Recently, over the last summer, they redid the entire school, and they put a lot of this furniture throughout their learning spaces as well as their collaboration spaces. The principal walked in one morning and saw that this little boy had created this train. Besides for the fact that it's an engineering marvel, the fact that he turned around and smiled for the picture and is what absolutely has blown everybody away in understanding actually how much a learning environment can change the life of a learner when it's done correctly. Later on, a few days ago, the principal actually shared with me that this hasn't only happened once inside this learning environment, but every day this little boy comes in and builds this train. The principal was floored because he's never seen this kind of interaction out of this child, because he's never had the tools inside that environment in order to allow him to be able to not only express himself in this kind of way, but also start to become connected in with the people around him, both the educators as well as his friends. Movement is critical. The beautiful thing for us is now, after many, many years of doing this, we've got some very phenomenal research around how actually important movement is to support and facilitate the learner. In terms of engagement and focus. It's quite the opposite to what we used to say to a learner inside an environment where we told them to stop fidgeting or to sit still. Now we recognize that that's completely counterintuitive to learning. So the onus is on us as designers of space and furniture to work out how we can incorporate healthy movement and action inside a learning environment, understanding that it's a critical component to increase levels of focus for any period of time. So these are things that we really think about when we approach design. It's about what is healthy movement, how can we incorporate it into the space to the point where it's helping the learner, but it's not hurting the learning process. And so again, something very, very important to think about when you're selecting furniture or trying to understand how to bring in these critical elements inside a learning space. Educator as facilitator to champion student-led learning and guided instruction. Our ultimate goal is to create an environment where the educator is alongside the learner for the journey, the guide on the drive, the one who's really facilitating the students around them to be their very best. But also we're thinking about how we can create environments that allow the educator to be the very best as well, and to collaborate with students in different kinds of ways that facilitate their needs. Community spaces. More and more, we're understanding that the necessity of having these spaces inside schools that bring people together to strengthen those social and emotional bonds. And once again, really facilitate and build on those soft skill sets that we know are going to help them once they head out into the world. Spaces that ignite possibilities, that encourage inquiry, spark curiosity, and continuous discovery. What we understand about learning is that the best kind of learning is the messy kind, the kind where you learn without even knowing that you're learning, where you are in an environment that actually sparks you to want to think differently and to think creatively, that facilitates this real creative approach to how we see life and how we see learning, and that it doesn't just begin and end at school, that these learners are going to go into environments that hopefully are going to continuously spark that discovery process for them. So where do we go from here? We'd like to invite all of you to join us in our mission, to join everyone in the mission to create a better educational system for this generation and future generations coming up. As I said, I'm a mom of 4 children. I've got kids from middle school all the way down to preschool. For me, it is personally important that we get this right, and that we learn together. We as a company stand to serve learners and empower educators. And the way that we do it is by creating these incredible, diverse spaces that do really speak to the needs of humans at the end of the day. If you design with people in mind, you will ultimately come to a better design. So let's give them space. Let's think about space in a different kind of way. Let's recognize the importance of the learning environment to facilitating all of these different types of connections, to ensure that we capture the needs of every single learner, and to ensure that we invite people into the learning process and don't block them out. If at the end of this, we can create environments where every single child can walk into a space, get what they need to be the best type of learner that they can be, and engage with the content in ways that are going to help them be successful citizens when they walk out of school, then we are creating environments that are really going to help us as society moving forward, particularly in these really, really difficult times. I want to thank everybody for coming into this presentation, for listening to us. We hope that at the end of the day, we've given everybody a real thought around the importance of thinking about the learning environment as part of the larger change process around education, and understanding the critical part of planning to ensure that this is a very, very strong consideration when thinking about creating an educational system in general.
And with that, I'll say bye for now. And thank you so much again, Jolene.
Thank you so much for having us.
Bye.